Hello, my name is Ryan Kramer. I exist on this planet for the purposes of. Oh, well, hey, I just now got started and you're already interrupting me. No, no, I am a creative director slash web developer who wanders the planet David Carradine style, and I have an unhealthy affiliate with the Decopoda creatures of this planet. Also, containing a subset of hermit crabs seems to catch my fancy for whatever reason.
Wait, so tell me what's included in the family of Decapoda?
Honestly, it just literally means 10-footed. So, and it's not even like it's kind of like a subset of crustaceans for the most part.
Okay.
So, and it's kind of loose too because to the best of my knowledge, it's like they let a lot of people in this club who aren't even necessarily 10-footed. Just, a lot of times it just means creepy crawly on the bottom of the sea and you got lots of appendages. Because it's funny, you can even get in an argument about, okay, does that count as an appendage or not? Like, what's the cutoff of this thing? What's up, Stubby, at the back of the room, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
that's not like this. So some of the Decapoda, but they all have 10 limb-like things you could
sure.
possibly consider feet.
Right. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. So, but yeah, they're part of this wonderful little family. They are not unlike, in some ways, like insects, where um, it's all about the exoskeleton for how their biology works, right? So, a lot of the things that people do for their care of these crazy little creatures is the starting point is based off of the insect world, a lot of it because of the fact that a lot of people are always trying to kill insects on land, and that helps you decide whether or not to accidentally finish off your hermit crab at the same time.
Oh my goodness. When did you get involved with hermit crabs? Has it been like the past few years or decades of life with
Oh,
these
so
things?
it's one of those situations where somebody else in your life, made the half-hearted attempt, and you were the one who wasn't necessarily interested in it, and then you got sucked in totally. It's not unlike the 1950s TV dad who's mad at everything and doesn't want the dog. And the kids are all like, oh, but please. And then, the dog comes home and the kids are like, yeah, the dog's nice or whatever. But then, the dad obsesses over it,
Does
right?
that mean you started with one of those like Christmas time mall hermit crabs, like an
So,
impulse buy?
so I will be perfectly honest. I don't think I had hardly anything to do with the decision on when we got the hermit crabs. We're running up at about almost, yeah, about 6 years we've had our hermit crabs, roughly thereabouts. And the funny thing about it is, it's one of those situations where they come home and you're like, okay, well, I guess this is a thing now. And it started with the daughter wanting them mostly,
Okay.
right? And to her credit, she wasn't that old at the time. She probably would have been six-ish into seven, depending on where the month cutoff is. Who knows what their age is? But um, she was smart in that she, knew that, a larger pet was never going to get approved by the parental authority figures. So
So she
you
was even at 6 or 7, she was running some kind of pet calculus in her head.
Right, right. So
Yeah.
you start by saying, "Oh my goodness, could we get, like they make it sound like it's going to be a really big deal kind of thing, and then they hit you with hermit crab, and then you're just sort of relieved." She's still doing that too,
That's
like
brilliant.
yeah, like she gave a presentation for her birthday, and then she asked for two books that were like $15 each on Amazon or something like that, and we're over here going, "Man, you could have swung way farther."
You're like it's almost like she's interviewing for a job and she asked for like half the pay you were going to give her and you're like,
Right.
"Wow,
It's
all
like,
right."
oh, hey, this person knows how to, work the system already at the tender age of 6, and that probably should be, filling me with a little bit more skepticism from here on out on how I potentially have been being played ever since.
So did you start with one? Is it all start with one or did you have a pair?
So actually, we started, and this was a case of having only one bit of useful information out of all the information you need to have.
Okay.
We had not one hermit crab. We had not two hermit crab. We had, I believe, four hermit crabs to start, and that
Whoa.
and so that wouldn't have been a terrible idea if it wasn't for the size of the cage that they were in. And so, like what you were talking about before, about the whole mall kiosk pet thing,
Yes, where they
that
give you a tiny little container and
oh
yeah.
yeah, oh sure. And there's all sorts of things that are wrong with that that I'll get to in a second. But the short version of that for now is it's just not nearly enough space for them to be able to function properly in how their biology works, right? It's the same thing as if you go to a fish store, depending on who it is that's there. If you go and you buy it at Walmart, you're just thrilled if they can, use the net properly without flinging the fish across the aisle. You go to and that's one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum is, of course, they'll say things like, oh, well, how many gallons is your tank? What kind of species do you plan on putting next to each other? And then they'll be like, oh, well, they need a little bit more space than that. Or, yeah, you can have that many. Or if you do get this kind, then you should consider this sort of secondary, like I call almost like a helper animal sometimes, where,
Uh-huh.
it's like, oh, well, this particular one fish or whatever, they've got a lot of, let's just call it byproduct. You should have a snail in there cleaning the sides of the wall or something. It just depends. And in this particular case, we had four little pinchers, and they honestly, they had a hard time of it. We lost two right away, and it was completely our fault, right? And I don't know if you want me to start segueing into what people screw up in these types of situations.
Yes, I want to know why don't, since you've led us there, tell me about your horrible failures with these sudden deaths.
Oh yeah, sure. So first off, you have this little tiny cage, and you're packing these crabs up on one another. And hermit crabs are they've got almost like a little bit of a dichotomy going on what they prefer to have. They what they like and what they like to have. What it boils down to is choice. So they are social, actually, creatures for a good portion of the time, where like they will literally sometimes just get into a little group in the wild and just sort of sleep on top of each other, and they'll do that sometimes. And then at other times they need space to literally, we use the term de-stress. Yes, that's a thing. Hermit crabs de-stress. And so what ends up happening is you bring these hermit crabs who, they were captured from the wild, because this is the other thing that needs to be pointed out.
Yeah.
It is really difficult, if not impossible. I've never known anyone personally who's been able to pull it off, to breed hermit crabs in captivity, right? And without going into too much about how it works, because my knowledge drops off a little bit there, but it's not unlike sea turtles, where you need a situation where you literally need this large, vast environmental area that can't exist in somebody's home.
Yeah.
And so, virtually all of your hermit crabs that are purchased are from the wild. They're
So, in
basically,
other words, the hermit crabs in the captivity of even a large enclosure will just not engage in the behavior that would lead to procreation and reproduction.
the part that where everything falls apart is,
Yeah.
you can get the fertilizing of the eggs, although that in and of itself is a step that often doesn't happen. But they spray them eggs, and then nothing happens. They just die there, right? So, unless somebody is like creating like the beach in their house, more or less.
Ah.
Yeah, yeah. That all, and I can admire that level of dedication, right? So,
Do you know people who literally have built like mini wave machines and mostly because they love their hermit crabs, or is that like way out of bounds?
so there, what you're dealing with there is, it gets really tricky because of other things like humidity. So you almost always have to have an enclosure. So then you're talking about, building a giant glass room inside of a room kind of situation is what it
Right.
would take to pull something like that off. I have not met the enthusiast who went quite to that level, right? So, but wouldn't that be cool? It's like, you get this, this giant delivery of sand from the store and your spouse is over there with their folded arms wondering what we've gotten into this time, right? Oh well. But yeah, so and the other thing is we had these crabs, we had these 4 crabs, their humidity was wrong. The food that we were feeding them was wrong. Like you go down the checklist, about virtually the only thing we had done right was the fact that we knew that you should try to have at least 3. Like that's what they say. It's like you need to try at least have 3 hermit crabs. And the reason why is because they like to have a pal, but they also need to have some space for themselves. And the general rule of thumb is 10 gallons of space per crab. And we had 4 crabs in a 10-gallon little plastic carry-all. Well, not carry-all, but little plastic aquarium glass thing. It's like, I think honestly, once upon a time, that 10-gallon enclosure belonged to a Madagascar hissing cockroach that I had previously. So there you go. Obviously, I'm all about the mainstream pets here. What can I say?
Yeah, could you just have a dog or something, or even just a goldfish? Jeez, Ryan.
Yeah, I know. It's like at the very least go for one of the more mainstream pets, but no.
I feel like when you do get a furred pet, eventually it's going to be like a kinkajou or something, you know?
Yeah. Oh, or a capybara or
A
something
capybara.
like. Yeah, exactly, right.
Okay, so you didn't know everything you needed to know, and look, wherever you bought it or your daughter or your wife brought it back from, they didn't give you all the information. So how come you didn't? A lot of times people have this first experience and they quit. How come? I know you still had 2 left. How come you didn't just quit? Nobody gave up. They're like, did you guys just learn everything you could and rejigger the environment? What'd you do?
Right. So this sort of goes back to what I call my Street Fighter paradox. And so, like some people, when they play a game and they lose badly, that's the motivation to stop then and there.
Yes.
And I've always had the opposite reaction. Like if I get beat down, I tend to not stop doing that thing because I'm stubborn. And even though, I might even give the visual cue of this sucks, I hate everything.
Right.
But in the back of my head, I'm going, okay, now what? What do I do next? Right. So this was since this was about 6-ish years ago, there was some information on the web back then that I could have actually find about hermit crab care. I hadn't found like the groups that I'm a part of now, like that hadn't really blown up into a thing just yet.
Okay.
Although there were, of course, some groups around back then, I just didn't find them and didn't know about them, right? In that case, either my Google foo or the Google algorithm, one of the two let me down, and I can't speak to which it was. But so I go and I start researching some things. And so what are some other things that I screwed up? Like let's say you're out there listening to this and you're a mom or dad and you've got the kid who wants one of these. What do you do for a bare minimum that you should bother so you don't accidentally kill these things right away? Well, there's a pretty decent checklist. So let's go through the absolute biggest stuff though. 1, get 3 of them as a minimum. This is back of the hand rule of thumb. 2, make sure that cage is about 30 gallons for them to start with. That already right there starts to make some people go, that's going to be a little bit of space in the house, right?
Yeah.
3, and this is another big one that people get wrong, the substrate. So the ground beneath your feet, it's rarely ever deep enough, right? So you're always way better off having a little bit too much in there and they don't have that much height, but having plenty enough to dig down. That's why your classic 29-gallon tank is a good starting point, because a 20-gallon tank and a 29-gallon tank, they're the same on your width and your length, but it's the height that you put in 9 extra gallons. It's all about adding the height so you can have that substrate, you have that space to dig it down into. And so you need to make sure that substrate is, and this will depend on the size of your crabs as well, right? So these crabs, they need that space to dig down and plus a little bit more. And it's so funny. A lot of people, they buy these crabs and they put them in these cages and they bring them home and they think, yay, we've got hermit crabs. if you've set it up properly versus what they had before, the first thing they're going to do is bury themselves in de-stress. Like this is a thing that we see happen all the time with hermit crabs. They're like, oh, thank goodness, I can finally either go down there and just get away from all this, overstimulation all the time. Like these are nocturnal creatures, and so they're used to being able to dig down if they want to and just have perfect black if they need to, right?
Yes. Okay.
And or maybe their health isn't optimum or something like that. So they dig down and and so you've got this poor kid is like, yay, I've got new pets, and then they bury themselves and you won't see them for months.
Are you serious? I was expecting when you said nocturnal, I'm like, they're going to leave the crowded field at the mall, which is full of like 30 hermit crabs all jammed together. They're
Yeah.
going to get to your place. They're going to get down there for a night's sleep or 2 nights sleep. And then boop, they're going to pop up and do their
No,
thing. And that is
no.
not what happens.
No, that's not what happens. Now, this isn't like a guarantee kind of thing, but it does
Sure.
happen often. And the other thing that people don't realize is, so a lot of people do know that hermit crabs need to molt. They need to shed their exoskeleton, but they don't. Some people don't realize just how long that process can potentially take. Now, on average, you might see a crab go down, molt, and come back up, and that process might take on the quicker end, a little bit less than a month, maybe,
Okay.
but they can be dug. Like we've had crabs. Myself personally, I've had a crab go down for almost half a year, and then I've heard others who've had their crabs where we tell people not to dig out the substrate to find them
Right.
for up to a year. A year, this could happen. So can you imagine, like, you buy your kid a pet and they're like, all right, you're in fourth grade now, but it's gonna be fifth grade before you see your new pet again. Congratulations.
Yeah,
So
and it reminds me of so that's the horrifying thing about turtles that run around in people's backyards. Sometimes they hibernate for a long time. Sometimes you don't know where they are. So
oh
it's not
yeah,
like you can see into this isn't like an ant farm where you can see
no,
where all the ants are. That it's just disappeared. It could be dead. It could have climbed out and
yeah,
slunk away. You have no idea where it is.
yeah, no, none whatsoever. And honestly, you don't want to be able to see them because if you can see them on the side of the cage or whatever through the glass, that means that they don't have it dark in there. They want it dark in there, right? And people sometimes can't help themselves. They start, like lifting objects in the cage. Like the second I have one crab or more down, I try not to lift anything in the cage if I can help it.
Okay.
Like I have water dishes and I have a dish, but I try to make sure that they don't sink too far down into the sand at any one time because those crabs they'll trash the cage constantly. Like that's actually one of the things that I find appealing about hermit crabs is it's literally you get everything set up nice and neat. They wake up at night, they trash it, and then you wake up in the morning and you're like, okay, well, I got to pick up after the party animals again, and then you keep going.
Have you ever been up? So they're nocturnal. Have you ever been? You must have sometime. Just up all night so you get to see the party.
Oh, well, so here's the other thing too. It's not a strict. Here's the weird thing about it. Every hermit crab's different. I have three hermit crabs, and each hermit crab has a different behavior for how much they run around during the day,
Okay.
and how much they prefer to have complete darkness or not. Like it sounds weird, but you hold on to, if you're even somewhat observant in the behavior of these goofy little things, you'll start to pick up the pattern on which one does what. So, for example, first off, my daughter gave our hermit crabs different names, and the one of the four initial crabs that we had, we still have two of them that when we first brought home who are still with us. In addition to a third one that we picked up later once we felt like we knew what we were doing again. And so we've got Eagle Talk. He's
Uh-huh.
the senior of the group. He's the biggest crab. And I say he, but let me point this out. Um, it's a little bit tricky to tell the sex of the crab, right? Like you
Okay.
have the way. Sorry, I cut out for a second there. The way to tell hermit crabs apart is you have to look underneath the abdomen.
Uh-huh.
So a male hermit crab won't have any appendages on the abdomen, and a female hermit crab will have three sort of feathery-looking appendages on the left side of their body, and the feathery appendages are sort of there to securely hold eggs, right?
And do you not know whether they're male or female? Because is it sort of traumatizing to like go yanking them out of their crab shell or whatever to look?
Yes, so
Okay.
it's a couple of things like that. So what ends one, we've had the names on them for so long that I'd be kind of bummed if sometimes you don't want to know the truth of the matter.
Right.
And my daughter, she basically gender assigned them all as males, and so they could all be females, and I could be over here going, this is just not right. Although, even then, that's a little bit projection, right? Like humans always do this, anthropomorphizing everything.
Yes.
So where it's like saying this name is masculine, this one is feminine. It's like, what is that? It's a random label, really, in the end of, of it all. So we've got Eagle Talk, and then we have Cookie Heart, who is the smallest of the group. And then in the middle, the jerk of the group, the aggressor of the group, most of the time, hasn't been as bad since we moved them into a new cage. Was Buttercake. Buttercake's my favorite of the three. I actually did a painting of Buttercake, and it used to hang on the walls of one of my former offices. And now that painting is somewhere in my house. But Buttercake,
You have to take a
yes.
picture of that for this podcast. Is your gender indeterminate hermit crab Buttercake aggressive to the point of danger to the other crabs, or is just one is the most active and the most pushy about where it wants to go?
Okay, so this sort of dovetails into, I can tell this conversation is going to be all over the place, and I apologize, but this sort of dovetails into how you can tell the difference between dominance behavior versus, something that could be construed as literally like you're talking about,
Yes, where it could be
threatening and
harmful.
dangerous.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's a couple different types of behaviors where they fall into different categories. And one of the things that some people wonder about is when they see a hermit crab on top of another hermit crab, right? And clearly the other hermit crabs, not happy about it, kind of thing.
Right. Right.
That is literally a show of dominance, where one hermit crab is on top of the hermit crab, but that does not count as necessarily aggressive. What you're looking for in aggressive behavior is something. There's some every hermit crab community has like slightly different slang, but I think the terms will be self-explanatory when you hear them. You'll be looking for things like shell rocking or shell jacking, right? So that would be a case of where something is not going well, and clearly it's dangerous for the other crab, where you see one crab literally trying to pull another crab outside of the other crab's shell, or
Okay, so clearly they're trying to make it's not just like here's me in my car bumping up against your car. I
right.
want to rip you out of your window and run you over
Yes.
with my car.
Yes, that's a perfect analogy where you have it's clearly something's not going right there. And
Okay.
so some people are like, okay, well then what causes that to happen? And usually it boils down to a couple things, like they either don't have enough space, the conditions of the tank aren't quite right, or one of the worst ones of all would be they're so malnutri they have such a lack of nutrition or not enough to eat that they're basically resort to a type of cannibalism, right?
Okay.
So there's a lot in all the in-betweens of that as it progresses from one to the next to the next. But usually it's something like that. We had Buttercake and Cookie Heart. They were both down, buried for a really long time. And when the second they came back up from their molts, I wanted to move them to their new cage because I literally had upgraded them to a larger
Yeah.
tank. And Eagle Talk was out the whole time, so all I had to do was pick him up and put in the other cage. A lot of people wish you could handle your crabs. I hate to say it, people, you should not be handling your crabs. You should keep that to a bare minimum. Again, another reason why it might not be the best pet for children, right?
They're cute. I mean, they're painting Batman and logos on their shells where they buy them sometimes, not in pet stores, but in malls, as
Yeah,
something to be handled. It looks like a toy, and what do kids
yeah,
want to do with a toy? They want to play with it.
right. And you actually hit on something else there too. Every single time we recommend buying new shells to get them out of those painted shells as quickly as possible. Hermit crabs are not picky eaters to their detriment. Those paints eventually, because of the fact that you're supposed to have the humidity of your tank at such a high level, like at least 80%, 85 to 90 if you can help it. They like it moist. You That paint will fleck and chip off, and
And they'll
then
find it in the sand and
they'll
eat it.
find it in the sand and they'll eat it. The ding dong dummies. It's not too much different than the dog and the vomit. You can't help them sometimes. You're like, dude, where's your discerning taste? So.
Wait, I feel like we have not delved anywhere deep enough into this topic, but I know you have to go, and I wanted to ask you one last question that you alluded to a bit when I asked you how come you didn't give up. What is the joy now that you're 6 years in? Is it just the joy of responsibility for a pet? Is it the discerning individual things about where do you get your personal joy? How do you feel taking care of these hermit crabs for so many years?
So here's the thing that I love about it.
Yeah.
It appeals a little bit to like being able to tweak things to like a little bit of an OCD nature, because I talk about all this stuff, right? Like I haven't hinted upon things like, for example, you need to have freshwater and saltwater dishes for them. If you can have bubblers also for freshwater pools and saltwater pools for them to be able to climb in and out of.
Holy moly.
And
Yeah.
then you can have secondary helper pets, if you will. Like a lot of people will actually raise pill bugs and throw them in there, and then when they die, then the hermit crabs like to eat them, right? So, and you can plant like chia in there, and then because what you want is sandcastle consistency sand, like 4 or 5 parts of that with 1 part, like say echo earth, which is like a little bit like decomposed earth, if you will. You mix that together, you get this sandcastle consistency stuff going on. You take all these different elements,
Yes.
and it sounds like a lot of work, but it's all in the setup, right? It's all in the setup. So once you get your hydrometer in there, you get your temperature gauge in there, and you're watching the dials on these things, and everything's just sort of working, right? It's like, they're responding to this environment that I've tweaked to makes them happy. Then you just sort of, change the food once every day or two. You tweak 1 or 2 things about the cage. You might spend 5 minutes, tidying things up after they rip everything out.
But then isn't that boring? If you figured it out, don't you want to move on to your next pet now if you've tweaked it to almost maximum efficiency?
Well, yes and no, because at the same time, they're, like I said, sometimes they bury themselves and they disappear for a while, but other times they will literally, like remember when I said some of the crabs will be down, or some people won't be running around during the days, and others.
Yes.
Eagle Talk runs around a lot during the day, and so I have the cage in my office. I go over there, and he's at least he's good for at least an 2 or 3 hours of movement a day on average. So I just
Right.
sort of peek my head around my monitor, and there he is. They've got climbing nets inside of there, and so it's just sort of like it's like this deliberate, slow moving creature, and you can do other things too. Like some people take hamster wheels, cut them in half, lay them on their sides, and they'll get on that thing like a treadmill, and they'll just walk it and walk it and walk it and walk it. And you start to find out what their favorite foods are even. And some people are like, okay, well, what kind of exotic food do you feed a hermit crab, right? And the real answer is what a human should be eating. And what I mean by that is, for the most part, you should be feeding them mostly organic foods. And this isn't like hippie kind of stuff. It's the reason why you want to have organic foods is because of the fact that, remember what I said earlier about these things being similar to insects or organic foods, they have fewer pesticides. There's richer in certain nutrients. And this helps because hermit crabs have an exoskeleton and nervous system that are a lot like insects. And that means they're, you know, they are susceptible to stuff like pesticides on non-organic produce. So we try to be really careful about stuff like that.
So it isn't just discovering about hermit crabs. There's also a joy in discovering about your hermit crabs.
My hermit crab,
what
yeah,
they want.
like everybody else in the group is like, oh my goodness, you want to know what hermit crab? My hermit crabs absolutely love. They love popcorn, and I'm like, oh really? I'm gonna try popcorn. And my hermit crabs are like, yeah, it's popcorn. But you know what? My hermit crabs really love. They will just lose their minds for a nice fresh slice of mango. They love mango, right? So yeah, it's fascinating because everybody, you know, especially for whatever reason, people just assume that, oh well, when it's a dog, they're like, well, my dog likes this and this and this, and my dog's the only dog like that. And then for some reason, it sort of goes the opposite way for these smaller creatures. Oh well, they're all the same, right?
Interesting. Yeah, where it's almost like the smaller and the less human, or the more the harder it is to anthropomorphize about the animal. Maybe sometimes people just kind of assume things about the entire category of that species.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's just one of those situations where you inadvertently realize, oh, there's a bias, there's a bias, there's a bias, and you have to be careful about that when you're trying to take proper care of something because misinformation kills these poor creatures.
Okay, I know you have to promise to send me a detailed email in the next few days, and I will put it in the podcast notes with information where if someone wants to, if they're thinking about getting a hermit crab or they suspect there's something troubling the one they have now, where should they go for that information? But I know you got to go, and so this was Ryan, and I suspect he probably knows almost everything about his hermit crab eagle talks skills and preferences.
All of this is true and so much more.